Jūratė. My name is Jūratė. Esu Šiaurės Amerikos Romuvos direktorė ir seniūnė. I am the director and an elder for Romuva North America. So you're here because you want to learn more about Romuva, or perhaps Baltic spirituality in general. Romuva is a modern expression of the ancient Lithuanian polytheistic faith. It is considered a polytheistic or pantheistic faith, and it is earth-based. It's unique among European native faiths because there is an unbroken link between the past and the present time. Our faith survived Christianity through direct practice, through the folk customs maintained by the Catholic community, and through the syncretization of ancient traditions with modern ones. For instance, the 12 dishes on Kūčios, or Solstice Eve, represent the 12 months of the year. In some regions, 13 dishes were served instead to represent the lunar months. Catholics have taken this tradition and have changed that to represent the 12 apostles, and they also use the same name, Kūčios, for Christmas Eve. The Lithuanian word for Christmas, as a matter of fact, is borrowed from the solstice, Kalėda. Many people who come to us were raised Catholic or have Christian backgrounds. We also have many who come to us from other paths, such as Wicca, Asatru, or other pagan-type faiths. The first thing I'd like you to do in order to understand Romuva or the Baltic faith is to throw out everything you know or think you know about faith, about God or gods, and about how to observe a faith. Put it outside on the stoop, bolt, and lock the door. Now, why do I say that? It's really quite simple. You cannot understand a faith by looking at it through the lens of another. I don't say that lightly because in conversations I've had with people who come to Romuva, I've discovered they have a tendency to try to fit Romuva into their expectations for faith. For instance, many Wiccans come to us seeking the magic and the spells of Romuva. That's not who we are. Yes, we have spells in the Romuva, but they're not central to our faith. They're just a small sliver. In fact, many of us do not practice any of the spells. We may practice divination as part of our, for instance, Kūčios, but really not spells in the way that Wiccans practice it. Christians tend to seek a holy book or a prescription of how to observe the faith. We don't have that either. We do have basic tenets of our faith that talk about how to be good and kind to the earth and its inhabitants, but there are no letters to and from prophets, no sermons on the mount. Catholics, on the other hand, may seek out saints in the forms of our gods and goddesses in order to make entreaties to or to develop relationships and have conversations with. That's really not how we observe our faith either. I've been practicing Romuva for over 20 years. I'm not a scholar or an academic, but I've read a lot in Lithuanian and English, as well as received guidance from elders in both North America and in Lithuania, namely Jonas Trunkūnas, who is a founder of Romuva. Let's talk about word usage. This particular discussion is based in my understanding and my preferences. However, the North American elders seem to be pretty much aligned with how I feel. I don't claim to be the final authority on anything, but as you'll see through these discussions, there is no absolute when it comes to practicing the faith of our ancestors, except for a few truths, which we'll get into a little bit later. So let's talk about the word religion versus the word faith. Religion to me implies that there is a rigid dogma and rigid expectations about how to practice a faith, and that there may be a book that one must follow. Romuva doesn't have any of those. Let's talk about the word faith. I prefer to speak of the Romuva faith. That to me is a more broad and, if you will, a more forgiving term to describe how our ancestors' spiritual lives were lived and how we strive to live today in the modern world with the same core beliefs. Now let's look at the word worship. Many faiths talk about worshiping their gods or goddesses. The word worship to me brings to mind the Western tradition of extravagant expression and prostration of one's own self in service to an all-knowing being. The way I like to describe Romuva is that we honor our gods and goddesses. As a Romuva, I consider myself to be working in concert with our deities to be a responsible, trustworthy, and loving steward of the earth and its beings. What do I mean by that? Well, many faiths or religions revolve around the gods as superior beings that can change the outcome of something if we pray hard enough. I don't view our faith that way. Some may, but not to the extent that I've seen in Christianity. We don't believe that Gaia is the personification of fire. We believe that Gaia is the fire. We don't believe that Saule is the personification of the sun. We believe that she is the sun. We don't believe that Gemina is the personification of earth. We believe she is the earth, that Perkunas is the thunder, that Austeia is the essence of bees and community. This is a significant difference from Abrahamic gods and other pantheistic and polytheistic faiths. Ancient effigies of our gods and goddesses are very rare. As a matter of fact, the only one I can think of is the Perkunas statue that was found in the aptly named Perkunas house in Kaunas in the late 19th century. Many of the humanesque depictions you see in modern day of Saule, Austeia, Gemina, Perkunas, Deities are all pretty modern. I think it's human nature to want to relate to our gods and goddesses in this way, but historically our deities were represented by symbols, or perhaps the anthropomorphization, for instance, of Lima as a bear or a cuckoo or an owl. Perkunas has traditionally been a goat. Now this brings me to my next point, our relationships with the gods. Many who come from different pagan traditions will try to establish individual relationships with our gods and goddesses. This was never traditionally done. We don't typically have conversations and things of that nature with our gods and goddesses. So we need to keep that in mind when we're learning about Romuva. Let's talk about holy books. Christianity has the Bible. Islam has the Quran. Judaism is guided by the Tanakh or the Old Testament. Hindus have the Rig Veda. But the Lithuanian language was not a written language until very late in its history. The first book in the Lithuanian language, as a matter of fact, wasn't published until 1547. Ironically, it was a catechism. In pre-Christian times, official documents were typically written in Old Slavonic. So the majority of what we know about our ancient faith is that which was recorded by sources outside of Lithuanian culture, what has been recorded by professional and amateur ethnographers starting in the late 19th century, or that which has been handed down through families. By the late 19th century, the majority of Lithuania was Catholic, so we didn't really capture the breadth of our historical ancient faith. We did manage to collect tens of thousands of songs. These ancient songs, or dainas, are like prayers to us. They hold our tradition. They hold our stories. They hold hints to how we practice our old faith. So while our tradition has unbroken links to the past through the families that preserve those traditions, and to some extent the underpinnings of the Lithuanian Catholic Church, a lot of what we know has been reconstructed. I used to bristle at the claim that Romuva was a reconstructed religion because of that continuity. However, I've come to accept that in many ways it is a reconstruction. To understand Romuva, you absolutely must understand the Lithuanian culture, traditions, and have at least a basic understanding of the Lithuanian language. Romuva is absolutely inseparable from Lithuania. That doesn't mean that you can't practice the Romuva outside of Lithuania, or that you have to be of Baltic ancestry in order to be a Romuvas. As a matter of fact, Jonas Trinkūnas, the founder of Romuva, made that very clear. Everyone is welcome. You do not have to be a certain color, a certain gender, a certain sexual orientation. Everyone means everyone. That's one of the things I love about Romuva. But that does not absolve us of our responsibility to understand the culture in which it is rooted. I myself am not absolutely fluent in Lithuanian. I can sing dainas, I can say prayers, I can read, and I have some basic conversation, but it can take quite a bit out of me to try to think in Lithuanian. But I am always working on getting better at that. Speaking of dainas, which are like prayers, the way our faith was practiced is actually reflected in the lyrics of many of the dainas. For instance, the dainas sung by a bride as she prepares for her wedding are often melancholic. The bride mourns leaving her parents' house and going to live with her new family, as that means she will have to honor different gods and leave behind her childhood gods. What that reflects is that faith in pre-Christian Lithuania was not centralized. The krivas did not dictate like a pope. The krivas mainly served the nobility. Each family had their own way of doing things, sometimes even their own personalized pantheon. For instance, a beekeeper might focus on Osteia, a smith on Televelis, a hunter on Medina, a fisherman on Iurate. Each village also had their own way to celebrate communal festivals, and from region to region is where you saw the biggest variation. That's reflected now in the differences in dress and the differences in foods throughout Lithuania. The major deities were consistent with perhaps some slight name changes. Laima, the goddess of fate who weaves our destiny. Žemyna, the earth. Saule, the sun. Menulis, her consort, the moon. Gabija, the fire. Perkūnas, the thunder and justice. Lastly, Dievas, the overarching sky god and creator. These are all of the major deities that everyone honored. So what does that mean for us in the modern world? In the diaspora, that's a little bit more difficult question to answer. Many of us didn't grow up with a culture and just started our journey into our ancestry as adults. And for those who did grow up with a culture, it was often through the lens of the Catholic Church, which is the majority religion in Lithuania. Since the Romuva and the Lithuanian culture and language are so inextricably entwined, everyone coming to Romuva must learn about all of it. You don't have to be an expert, but we definitely want you to know about the culture and learn a bit of the language. Some years ago, we had some issues with eclectic pagans taking our gods and goddesses, dainas and rites, and mixing these with other pantheons and traditions. This is something we do not condone. While we can't control what individuals do, we ask that you be respectful of our ancient faith and to not bring it into any eclectic mix. We do understand that some people walk more than one path, and we wholeheartedly support those who wish to do so. We just ask you to keep those paths separate from each other. There's one exception to that rule, and that's if you are representing Romuva at a multi-faith gathering, and others are sharing blessings or singing songs. It is very appropriate to offer one of ours. We view that as a cultural exchange rather than a mix and match effort. The biggest thing I can ask of you is please do not believe everything you read on the internet. There may be something that you see mentioned on numerous websites, and you think, oh, that's all over the place. It must be true. Not necessarily. Be cautious, especially if you find the same wording on multiple sites. It's likely to be lifted from one site and just parroted all over the internet like a virus. It may or may not be true. So just be careful that the sources you are using are primary sources or well-researched sources that are accepted by scholars of Lithuanian history, culture, and folklore. On the other hand, you may find someone who says, my family did this or that. Just because something isn't backed up with an academic source or historical source doesn't mean that it's not authentic. It may be a tradition that's peculiar to that family, or perhaps the village in which they lived. Or it may have been altered by Christian influence. So I try not to discount anything in regards to people's family traditions. But this is Romuva, and while we have no holy book, no strict dogma or prescription for how we express our faith, it is a modern expression of an ancient faith. And there are some things we don't do, like casting a circle and calling the four winds. That's just not part of our tradition. So what is expected of us as Romuvai? There are basic tenets of our faith, and much of it is aligned, for instance, with the 10 Commandments of the Jewish and Christian faiths. We will have a separate video specifically addressing the tenets of faith. But in brief, they are recognizing the life force of the world at large and its eternality, striving for dharna, or harmony, being moral, following the golden rule, honoring our gods and goddesses, remembering our ancestors, and holding nature sacred. So there really is not one way to practice the Romuva faith. But all practice must be rooted in history. All practice must be rooted in Lithuanian culture. All practice must be rooted in a very good understanding of our history, our culture, our rituals, our dainas, our prayers, our language. Without that solid foundation, it is very difficult to stay true to our faith. I hope you've enjoyed this very brief introduction to Romuva. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Click the bell icon to be notified when a new video comes up. Iki pasimatimo, until we meet again.